Welcome to Breaking Silence, a safe and brave space where we have real conversations about race in America. Hi everyone, welcome back to our vlog, Breaking Silence. Today we are going to be talking about how the past shapes us, and we're really excited to jump into this topic. As we were sharing our videos with some of the viewers, we had people asking us some deeper questions into Aziza and I's background and how some of the experiences that we had, growing up and with our families and school and where we were and all of those things, how those things are influencing who we are today. So we're going to dedicate today's episode to really jumping into a bunch of our viewers' questions and answering those directly for you.
All right, and I have them here on my phone, so I'll jump right in with the first one. Did your parents talk to you about race?
That's a good one. Who do you want to go first, me or you?
I might have two different answers because I have two different races of parents. So I'll go first, and I will say my parents talked to me about race, but in a very non-structured way. So I never had a sit down talk about race except for one time. And I remember my dad we were driving in a car, and I remember for some reason, I remember being confused about why now was the time, but he said, just so you know, a child typically takes the race of their father. So when you're filling out forms or when you're asked about what race you are, a child will usually take the race of their father. And that was it. That was all the conversation was. That was the only structured conversation. Now, I will say they did talk to me about race, but it was in more, sometimes subtle, sometimes not subtle ways that I didn't really understand at that time. Only now do I understand, and I think that is a point in and of itself, because the best way for me to explain is just to tell you examples. So for example, I remember my mother bringing me home a white doll. I don't think it was a Barbie, but it was a white doll. And I do remember my dad making her return it. And it wasn't a conversation necessarily, but it was just, you're not going to have that doll. And maybe that doll doesn't look like you. And so if you can consider that talking about race, that's one thing that happened that was something that happened from my parents to me to teach me about race. Another example I can remember is one time I loved the show Friends. I loved it. I still love it to this day. Me and my friends would watch it and like talk about it at school the next day. And I remember it was the season finale one night, and it came out on Thursday nights, and I wanted to stay up to watch it. And it was such a big deal that my dad made me go to bed that night. It was so huge. He never made me go to bed. It came on at like 8:00. He never made me go to bed. But this time it's a season finale. I really wanted to watch it. And we were just yelling. I was crying. And I remember he yells at me as he's telling me to go upstairs and get to bed. He says, you where do you even see yourself on that show? You don't need to watch that show. That show, these people aren't you. You don't even see yourself on this show. This is not your show. So again, not really talking to me about race, but kind of. And then other things that might have happened in jest, like my family that we interact with and are close to are the white side of my family. I didn't really know the black side of my family. A lot of it is because a lot of them have passed away. My dad has a really rocky relationship. I found since his death, actually, I found this out, rocky relationship with that side of his family. So he has a sister. She was actually in prison for the majority of my life. She is not anymore. So those were some of the reasons that I wasn't as close to my black side of my family. But so my white side, we had a family reunion every other year, and we would go out to a lake up in New York, upstate New York, and there would be a bonfire. And I do remember one time my dad said, and I'm pretty sure he was joking, but he said, you never want to be too close to white people in a big fire. And the only reason I'm unsure is because I know me and my brothers laughed, but I can't remember if he was laughing. I can't remember if it was a joke or not. So and those are the data points I have. if somebody asked me, did your parents talk to you about race? That's literally all I have. And that would be both on my white side and my black side. There was one story also, this is more of a family story than talking to me about race, where my mom, there's a picture of me and my mom and my grandmother, my great grandmother. And I remember my mom sharing with me, which again, I don't know why they would share this with a child, but or maybe it was good, but the fact that when I was born, I was lighter. All babies, usually are lighter skin when they're first born. And so they wanted to take this generation of women in the family photo, and they wanted to do it at an accelerated rate. Like, they didn't want to wait too long because they didn't want me to get so dark that when you look at the picture, I was clearly darker than everybody else. So that's not really talking to me about race, but it's kind of talking to me about how race was seen in my family, or how I was seen in my family. And I do know that my grandma at first did not support my mother marrying my father because he was Black. I know that she didn't at first. My grandmother now could not be more loving and kind and accepting and welcoming to me and my brothers. So no issue at all there now. But I was told that at the beginning. So like everybody else, every single conversation my parents have had with me about race now.
I think that is not what I was expecting you to say by any means. Like, I thought your dad probably had conversations with you about it, especially considering the dynamic that you were growing up and being biracial and having such a clear, like every day, right? Like, mom is light and mom and dad is dark. That's your reality. And so I just imagined that as a child and you're little, that conversation comes up, not even necessarily from a perspective of race, but just children being curious and observant, and just like, why is mommy lighter and why is daddy darker, and those types of things. So I think in my mind, I just thought that those conversations would have been happening. I guess my question would be, do you wish that they had had more formal conversations with you about it, or do you feel like, like it is what it is? And
I do wish we would have had more formal conversations about it, because, and then as a child, like I see what you're saying, where like child curiosity, and it just makes sense that you would see this difference. But I think for us as children, this was our reality, so we didn't need to question it. It kind of reminds me of the fact that I was, 10 years old before I realized other families knew about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I thought that was just something that we did. Like, sometimes the minds of children, like, and I'm sure we all have memories like that, where we're like, oh, this is either weird that our family does this, or this is normal, and this is not just our little secret, right, of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So I think for us, we didn't question it, because this is just how this is, and we didn't see a reason to see it as any different, because it was all that we had ever known. But I do wish there were more structured, and specifically around education. I wish I knew more about my culture, or I wish I knew, now that I realize that my dad wanted that white doll returned, and he was upset that I was so crazy about this show. I realized it was because there was no representation in those things, and it didn't teach me to love myself. And I think more structured conversations with my parents would have taught me to love myself, because I did not grow up loving my skin color, my hair type, my difference, the way I differentiated from my white friends. I didn't grow up loving that and seeing that as beautiful. And I think that would have helped with that, because it really contributed to me just wanting to be the same as everybody else.
My answer is going to be pretty short and sweet. And there were not conversations in my family about race in any kind of a formal, informal. Like, I was not told, don't see color. I wasn't told color's bad. It was neutral. Like, it just wasn't talked about. We had a very large older generation in my family. So my great grandmother, I was fortunate to know her until she passed when she was 98. I was in my 20s. And she had around 14 brothers and sisters. So, they grew up in a very different time. And so there was some narrow-mindedness that you would hear in those conversations, but it was not like overt supremacy. Like it wasn't like we're better, these people are worse. It was more it's so hard to, okay, I was so little. I'm trying to think of like a specific example, but like they might make a joke about something like, oh, like if a brown person moved in the neighborhood, like, oh, like neighborhood's gonna go to shit, but it wasn't really serious. It was more like a joke that wasn't necessarily helpful.
Yeah.
Or kind, right? Like they meant it in a joking way, but you're like, just don't say that stuff. But my immediate family, not really anything at all. And we had a couple of immigrant families in our neighborhood when I was growing up, and my data point was that my family treated them the same way that they treated other people, with like kindness and looking out for them or checking their mail if they were on vacation, that kind of thing. And so I think for me, not that I was taught color, and we've talked about this a little bit, and we're going to talk about this in our colorblind episode, but I wasn't taught to not see color. But I think just from watching my family when I was growing up, it was like the person always came first. So what I would always hear is conversations about if this person was a good person, or if this person was doing bad things, or is this person being unfaithful to their spouse, or like those types of things were really what the conversations revolved around, less so than color. And when things would happen in the news, again, they would never talk about race. So like Rodney King, I remember that happening, but I was really confused. I mean, I was pretty young, and so I knew that like there was this guy and that the police were arresting him, and in my growing up, police were the people who helped you, right? If you needed help, you went to a police officer. And we had history in my family. My biological father was an abusive alcoholic, and so the police being good and helpful was something that was ingrained in me from when I was really small, because there was a lot of drama and things that just happened when I was little. And so my family always wanted to make sure that if I was ever in a situation where I was in danger or I needed help, that I would always go to somebody in uniform, versus like hiding or whatever. So in watching the whole thing with Rodney King play out, it was like, okay, well, if the police were arresting him, in my little head, I'm thinking he must have done something bad. I don't know what he did. And now like people are burning the city down, and I don't know why people are burning the city down. But like this guy did something bad, and then the police did something bad, and I don't really know all of the bad things that happened, but I know that my parents were sympathetic to Rodney King. But it was never explicitly stated. Like no one ever sat me down and said, here's what's happening. Here's racial tension in America. Here's why we are sympathetic with him. It was just like what I saw on the news, and then what I heard happening in conversations at the dinner table around me. And so anytime that something would happen like that in the news, that was usually my context, was just what was the conversation at the table, but it never got into really explaining details around it. So it's a little bit of a longer answer, but my short answer is nope, no conversations about it, not being taught about it, one way or the other, or having awareness around it.
So what you just shared kind of gets me riled up when I think about current day. So you talked about, Rodney King happening. That made me think of, okay, Rodney King, also O.J. Simpson trial was big when we were younger. I remember my dad watched it every day all the way through, right? But
my grandfather did the same thing every single day.
But they never talked to us about it. It was a big issue with race. Both of those things, race played a big part in it. And so then it makes me think about now, and the George Floyd and the Trayvon Martin and all the stuff is happening. And depending on your social media feed, you might see some of your friends that are parents that are talking to their children, white and black, but there's also people that are still not talking to their children, and it's getting me really riled up now, because I'm realizing what a disservice our parents did to us by not sitting us down and talking to us about what was going on in our lives at that time. And is our generation doing that same disservice, or are we talking to our kids about it? I don't know if you saw that CNN, I think we talked about the CNN Sesame Street Townhall that they did on
Yeah.
the racial inequality. I sat and cried through that, and I loved every bit of it, but it still at that moment didn't make me think, oh, wouldn't it have been nice if they did this when Rodney King happened, or when O.J. Simpson would have been a little different, but oh my gosh. So anyway, that's like riling me up right now. So just wanted to share. Okay. Next question from our viewers was, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, but a little bit not. Were your parents racist?
Okay, so I'll go first this time. So were my parents racist? Well, if you've not watched our episode on the definition of racism, I would encourage you to go back and watch that, because what I've learned is if we're going by that more academic definition, then I have to say yes, because that definition says that all white people living in America would be. But going by what my prior definition of that word was, which means like, are they believing or acting on the thought that, we're better because we're white and people who are brown are worse because they're brown? I would say no. And again, I think just based on how they treated people, what I saw of my parents is that they were always kind, respectful. Like my mom was a nurse, and there was a nurse that she worked with who was a Black woman, and she would always tell stories about them at work, and funny things that were happening, or some witty thing that this lady would say. And so like when I was young, my mom would bring me to work with her sometimes. I already loved this woman just from all of these stories because my mom spoke so highly of her, but I never knew that she was Black until I met her. Yeah, like it just never came up in conversation. Like my mom would just talk about her. And where my dad worked, I didn't have as much exposure there. He worked in a factory, and so it wasn't safe for kids to be in there. But the majority of people, from my understanding, that he worked with were either Black, Latino. I don't know what the mix of white to Black and Latino all was, but like I know when he retired, there were a few people that came to our house to see him, to wish him well, and they were people of color. So I feel like if he had been acting in a way different at work than he did inside our home, they probably would not have done that. These are all very indirect and kind of wishy-washy conclusions that are, examples that I have to go by. But I've never heard my parents say anything hateful about someone who's a person of color. And like I said, extended family, sometimes jokes or whatnot that were not well thought out or not appropriate to say. But that's about it. Yeah.
Okay, so that was your memories of them then. And so now knowing them and seeing them with an adult lens, would your answer change at all?
I would say I know more strongly now than I did when I was little that they are not.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. Very, well, I don't want to get like political. When I say liberal, I don't mean like democratic, but very much so open to civil rights and equal opportunities for people regardless of, sexuality, race, gender, all that stuff. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's unique. I don't know if we've mentioned this before, that you spend a lot of time with your parents now, as an adult, like a lot of time living in the same city. And so I'm wondering, as we talked about, our parents didn't talk to us about Rodney King or O.J. Simpson. What about now? Are you all having those conversations now? Do your parents have those conversations with you about what's happening current day, or is it still the same?
Mm-hmm.
Talk about it.
Yeah, they talk. I mean, I feel like I need to get them out of the house more because I think all we talk about is the news. It's healthy to have a good understanding of what's happening in the world, and it's also important to balance having time away from all of that, because I think that if you're not careful, it can really consume you. And I know for me, it really impacts my mood and my energy level, and I can just get really caught in my head, and my feelings around those things. But literally every day we are having a conversation about what has happened in the news, and I would say recently, probably 50% of the time, it's something around like racial tensions in the country that's happening.
And are
Well,
you finding that you have opportunities where you need to redirect them or help them explore a different viewpoint? Like, I'm just wondering, like, when they talk to you, are you like, like, let's think about this another way?
yeah, I mean, so what I would say is that when they're having the conversations, they're highly emotional, and I don't always feel like they're the most productive conversations that we could be having. And so redirecting them is more me trying to open them up to being open to hearing what other people may be saying or what other people may be thinking. And that is not to say that I'm agreeing or disagreeing with either side. I tend to play this very interesting part where I've always felt like I could hear two sides of the same thing, and I can understand where this person's coming from, and I can understand where this person's coming from, and I may have my own opinion about it. And I've always done this in my family. Like, if two people in my family were having an argument and I'm like, what you're really saying is this, and what you're really saying is this, and the two of you are almost saying the exact same thing, like, we don't even need to be fighting about this. Now I feel like I'm doing that, but it's with more of like these bigger issues. So for example, like my grandmother has swung the pendulum on like police in America. And I will say something to her just to kind of bring her back maybe to the middle a little bit, of saying, like, we can't have all or nothing thinking. We can't say every police officer in this country would do something like this, right? And then it's almost like she'll get upset because she's like, so you're saying that what happened was justified, or that person deserved to be shot, or, and I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. It's not what I'm saying. I absolutely don't condone, the things that we've seen happening, and those things absolutely need to change. But the way for us to change them is not by polarization. But that does not mean that there should not be any change. And so that's where I find myself trying to kind of redirect them a little bit, is to get them to a place where we can have a conversation that acknowledges the awful things that are happening, but does so in a way that we're not immediately eliciting this response from others who maybe have police in their family, right? Like they've made sacrifices. They're watching a family member go on duty every single day and get shot at for trying to do the right thing. And maybe they know that this person in their heart is a good person, that they would never brutalize somebody. But now they're being lumped in with this like general attack. Does that make sense? So it's like trying to say, okay, yes, this is bad. We can acknowledge that. Maybe it's not everybody doing it. Yes, things need to change. Maybe it's training. Maybe it's the mix of the police force. Like, maybe I've heard like, hiring more women, because stereotypically women are more empathetic and slower to make judgments, or like less egotistical. I'll get into all that. But anyway.
I just asked because, when I saw that question come through, I was thinking, okay, are your parents racist? I need to answer then and now, I think. And now with people in my family, my fiance, with white people in my family, my white fiance, I'm finding that I'm having to redirect conversations or challenge people's beliefs And so I just wondered if that was happening to you too, and you kind of sometimes might be sitting at the dinner table and like, man, my dad just said something that I now realize is basically racist. So I was just wondering if that was happening to you, because it's happening to me, the white people in my family. So
I think they've swung in the opposite direction. I don't know if I would say they're anti-racist. I feel like they just more get upset about what they see and they want to talk about it, but it's not like there's a lot of action, I guess, happening. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because that's another thing I was wondering when you were talking. I was like, okay, so your grandma's saying, okay, all police are bad, which of course I don't agree with either. All police are not bad. I do see value in defunding the police, or ideas to explore that option. So maybe we can talk about that in a different episode. But I wondered when you said that, okay, so grandma, you're saying all police are bad. Are you also saying that you're going to vote differently in your local elections? Are you also saying that, you know, whatever, right? So I was wondering that. Okay, so for me, I know I kind of changed a little bit. I would say, based on my previous definition of racism, the belief that certain races are superior to others, I would say yes. I definitely grew up for a while thinking that my dad had racist tendencies, racist beliefs, even from some of the things that he said that I shared with you recently. Definitely. He definitely had a negative view of white people. And I think that was based on him seeing white people having a negative view of him and the way that white people treated him. So despite having married a white woman, I think that I mean, I'm so perplexed by this whole thing with how he acted, things he said, with the fact that he was married to a white woman and had biracial kids. So I did grow up thinking that. I had no opinion on my mother. She didn't say anything one way or the other growing up. Now with my evolved and enhanced understanding of racism, I realized that, you know, my dad had these thoughts, had these discriminatory, prejudiced thoughts. So maybe perhaps not racist, but definitely prejudiced, definitely discriminatory, and yeah, didn't necessarily try to hide it. He might have tried to hide it, and it was like a lot bigger than what the kids saw. But you know, this is also inspiring me to reach out to my brother. So I have 4 younger brothers. The next one under me is 35 years old. So they're all adults, and then even the youngest one is 20 something, 28 maybe. So they're all adults. So I'd love to tap into their memories and see what they remember as well, which is a perk of having siblings. So I think I'll do that. But now that I look back on it, I saw nothing from my mother. No, one way or the other, nothing. I saw nothing from her as a child. As an adult, I do see her not interrupting racism. I see her standing by complicitly. So my mother has since remarried. She married a white man, and there have been some behaviors and some things that have happened, and not too many, maybe like two things, 3 things that have shown me that my mother is racist. My mother has racist beliefs, racist thoughts, which again, super perplexing, right? Like, she has 5 brown children. She married and was married to, even if it wasn't happily married, 16 years to a black man. So it's so weird. But then that also makes me think, like, of all those people who like to say, like, oh, I'm not racist. I've dated 3 black girls in my life, or I'm not racist. I've got all these, like, to me, like, that argument is so weak. It weakens it so much based on my personal experience. I would definitely say that my mother has racist beliefs and tendencies currently. But as a child, I didn't see anything like that. Like my mother, I'm so proud of her. She learned how to cornrow hair. So she braided my hair for me because my dad wouldn't let me get a relaxer. Which again, now that I was mad at him as a child, so a relaxer is when you straighten the curls, chemically straighten the curls, so it's easier to maintain and easier to get that straight, flowy, movable, closer to white people's hair that a lot of black girls crave in my generation. So he wouldn't let me get a relaxer for a long time, which I didn't realize then, but now maybe that was him trying to teach me to love myself and to be true to myself and to be authentic. but the conversation was never had. It was just, no, you can't do that. But anyway, so for years and years, my mom, she learned how to cornrow, and she would braid my hair. And, you know, as a white woman growing up, you don't know how to cornrow. So she had to learn how to do that. And I have always been so proud of her for that. And she didn't ever treat me like she wished I was lighter. I do remember her looking at pictures and like oohing and awing over her cute baby like me, right? So I never had any inklings of that as a child at all. But I will say I am very disappointed in my adult life seeing things that it stands passively by for, or even some words that come out of her mouth. So.
But you know how, like you've mentioned in the past, that when something happens, you're hesitant to call it out because you're like, well, I don't want to be the one that ruins Thanksgiving or, you know, friends' happy hour and whatnot. Do you ever see that similar, like, do you see a similar struggle in her? Like, do you think that's part of it, or you think it's just that she's more blind to it?
No, I don't think that's similar. I don't think that she's doing it to maintain the peace. Maybe she doesn't want to fight, because sometimes, you know, a couple, maybe one or two of my examples might involve her husband saying something and then her not challenging that or speaking up. So maybe she's trying to keep the peace in her marriage. That just makes me just so disappointed to even say, though. Like, I mean, of course, I'm disappointed in myself when I tell you that, you know, I don't want to ruin Thanksgiving or whatever it might be, but I don't think it's similar. I think this is just, she feels like she has a past because she has 5 brown children and because she married a black guy. So maybe she feels like she can't be racist. And so these things that she thinks and says, she has the right to say them because clearly her heart's in the right place. But clearly it's not. So